Last year, I focused a lot on Chinese medicine and point prescriptions to support facial rejuvenation and points to, address other skin conditions as well. And so, by the way, I'm a little nervous right now, but in a couple minutes my voice will stop shaking and everything will be fine. But this year I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach when it comes to hormonal balance, because it's really what I use in my practice along with energy medicine. But I love, love, love this topic because there is so much that we as women can do for our hormones without necessarily taking hormones. So in my practice, I don't look at myself as somebody who treats symptoms or who treats disease. I really don't necessarily care what the symptom is or what the disease is. My goal is to establish a level of health where the body really recognizes the condition, and with a little guidance from me and a little commitment on the side of the client, the body can really find its own healing process. So hormones don't go astray on their own. They don't live in a little bubble all by themselves, and a hormone imbalance isn't really necessarily a hormone deficiency. We're, as you heard yesterday from all of the other speakers, we're holistic beings. That means focusing on the interdependence of all of our parts. So when you go to a medical doctor and you have hormonal symptoms and they give you a hormone, it may take care of your symptom, but it doesn't get to the root cause of why your hormones are going awry.
Can I make one comment? I'm a medical doctor, but usually they're giving you not a hormone, they're giving you a drug that has some hormone-like activities, but it has many other activities, so it's far worse than a bioidentical hormone.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you.
So it's worse than you're making.
Yes, and I do use bioidentical hormones in my practice sometimes too. I'm not saying that they're never necessary, but my real passion in medicine is getting to why. Why is this person the way they are? And I don't want to mask it with, although I do use supplements, I don't want to just give a supplement to treat a symptom. I want to know the cause of that symptom so I can resolve the cause and get to a greater balance within the body. So, Dr. Linda was kind enough to set me in a good place because she just got done talking about stress. Stress is something that affects our body every day, and it really disrupts the balance of our body. And I'd like to start today by asking, from you all, whether it's you or your clients, can you tell me some stressors that you feel like you're under? Let's name about 5. Work.
Somebody said children.
Children. Yes.
Spouses, relationships.
About
Money.
money. Anything else? It's a good one, yes. And those are all things that I see in my practice. But what I notice is that no one mentioned internal stresses. And that's where I live in my practice. I live in the area of internal stresses and what how those internal stressors are affecting a client's body. When I say internal stresses, I'm talking about food sensitivities, I'm talking about blood sugar dysregulation, I'm talking about immune system problems, parasitic infections, bacterial infections. These are all stressors that we all have that can throw a body off of balance, hormonal balance or otherwise, but they often go overlooked. Not to mention the food, toxic food we eat, the water that we drink, the air that we breathe. They're all a stress on our body, and they all play into bringing us to a place of imbalance. It's no wonder that hormonal imbalance for women is rampant. It's an epidemic. I see so many women dealing with this problem, and it's not just a hormone. It's not just estrogen. It's not just progesterone. It's a bigger problem. It's a symptom of a larger problem going on within the body, and I label those things as stress. So we're going to explore these stressors within what I call the pillars of health. So we're going to talk about the adrenal and hormonal system, we're going to talk about nutrition, and we're going to talk about digestion, immunity, and detoxification. And I have grouped some together in the interest of time, but also they have a symbiotic relationship. So to start off with the adrenal and hormonal system, you don't hear much about the adrenal glands. A lot of, not Dr. Linda, but a lot of medical doctors don't even consider them. And I really consider them. I think they're really important. In Chinese medicine, they're part of the kidney energy, that really foundational energy. But they're the glands of stress. They sit atop of your kidneys, under your 12th rib. Your right one looks something like a pyramid, and your left one looks something like a half moon. And they are there to help you deal with stress, whether it's from your work, from any of these things, these external stresses, or whether it's from internal stress, food sensitivities, bacterial infections, parasitic infections. They are the glands that all of that stress lands on. And if you have an under-functioning adrenal gland, you've got some problems. And that's another reason why hormone imbalance is rampant, because people's adrenal glands are stressed. So if you would pull out a couple things for me from your packets, something that looks like this. So that circle chart, at the top it says physiological aspects of cortisol and DHEA, why we must assess adrenal function. So you see in that middle circle, it says cortisol to DHEA ratio. Now that means nothing to you probably, so you could literally cross that out and put adrenal health or adrenal fatigue, because the cortisol to DHEA ratio is what I look at through a saliva test to see how someone's adrenals are functioning. And then you see all of these circles around that middle circle. And they have, they're attached by spokes. And these are all the physiological functions that the adrenals have under their control. And so if you have an under-functioning adrenal gland, you'll start to see symptoms in all of these areas. Now for our discussion today, because we're talking about hormonal imbalance or hormonal balance, let's start over in the lower right-hand corner where it says endocrine function. Well, endocrine function is talking about ovarian and hormone problems. It's talking about your thyroid. 85% of the time, a thyroid condition isn't a thyroid condition, it's an adrenal problem. And if you can correct the adrenal imbalance, you can correct the thyroid problem. But, you know, a lot of people just give thyroid medication, whereas if they would restore adrenal function, thyroid would come back online. But that's something that those, the endocrine function, all those hormones and the thyroid function is under the control of the adrenal gland. If we go counterclockwise up to neural tissue health, we're talking about the quality of your sleep and your mood, your memory and learning, foggy thinking. We have musculoskeletal health, so that's bone, muscle integrity, connective tissue, aches and pains, osteopenia, osteoporosis. You know, can have a lot to do with adrenal function. Carbohydrate metabolism is the next circle. We're talking about blood sugar problems. One of the primary symptoms of adrenal fatigue is people who cannot manage their blood sugar. They have high blood sugar, low blood sugar, they can't get it under control. Eicosanoid modulation. Eicosanoids really, they exert control over inflammation and immunity. Inflammation again, migraine headaches, body aches and pains. Really important system there. The next circle is detoxification capacity. Your capacity to detoxify heavy metals, to detoxify everything that is being brought into your body, which is, as we've talked about over the last couple of days, a lot. The metabolism of fat and protein. You know, weight and fat distribution, your ability to break down protein. A big gut is a primary symptom of adrenal exhaustion or adrenal dysfunction. So, you know, when we're talking about the adrenal glands, we're talking about all of these areas, all of these circles around this middle circle. There are 3 phases of adrenal fatigue. We have alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. The alarm phase is that fight or flight, that when you have an acute stressor going on, your adrenal glands kick in, they produce a lot of cortisol to enable you to deal with the stressor in front of you. And after that, you know, that usually lasts anywhere from a couple of minutes to a couple of hours, usually. And after that time, you go into what we call recovery. And you can all probably remember a time where you were really stressed, and then a couple of days after that, you're tired. You are tired, and you wonder, gosh, oh, that took a lot out of me. I'm tired. And you may be tired for 24 hours, 36 hours. You may be tired for a week after that, depending on the health of your adrenal glands. But the reason for that fatigue is because during that recovery process, you don't produce as much cortisol as you did during that alarm phase where your body was just ready to deal with the stress. So after the recovery phase, if there are additional stressors, if there's additional stress or stressors, you'll go into what we call a phase of resistance, where the cortisol level will rise again to enable you to deal with those stressors. You know, and how long you stay in this phase of resistance is really dependent upon your genetics, your constitutional resiliency. You know, you may stay in that stage of resistance for a couple of months. You may stay there for a couple of years. You may stay there for many, many years. I see people all the time. How long have you had all these symptoms? Oh, maybe about 20 years. 20 years. And so when people are in resistance, when their cortisol levels are high like that, I don't see people. I never see people when they're in this stage of resistance, because what's happening is their body is pumping out the cortisol to deal with whatever stress that they are under. I see people when they come out of resistance and they go into exhaustion. They go into adrenal exhaustion, and all those circles that we just looked at, symptoms start to pop up. They start to get hormone problems. They get body aches and pains, they get blood sugar fluctuations, they get weight distribution, not an inability to lose weight. So the exhaustion phase, it can come on pretty quickly, but also when people are in the exhaustion phase, they're out either self-medicating themselves or they're trying to get help. And I think sometimes people come to people like me as a last resort, and they think, you know, oh, my doctor couldn't help me, so maybe I'll try this person, you know. Yes. And all the while, if you pull out your little colorful chart here, this is the progression of the stages of adrenal exhaustion. And over here on the left-hand side, you see your cortisol sum. And along the bottom, we see the stages of adrenal fatigue. And, you know, quote-unquote normal people that aren't under a lot of stress, I don't know who they are, but they may be here in the green. Like their body's producing cortisol as it should, and they're just going along their life. And the alarm is like up here on the top of this graph in the yellow area. And then when you go into recovery, you may slip down really low when you're recovering from an acute stressor. But when you go into that phase of resistance, you go back up and you stay here until because your cortisol levels rise, until your adrenals get so exhausted that they can't produce cortisol anymore. They can't do it. And so you start sliding down this graph into adrenal exhaustion. I see people here in this area, mostly in the orange area. I've seen a couple people down here. These people are really tired, they have body aches, they have food sensitivities, they have all of those things that we were talking about here. And all during this time, when they've been sliding down this slope, they've been looking for somebody to help them. But what they've been given is pain medication, they've been given HRT, hormone replacement therapy, they've been given thyroid medication, so they're not doing anything to address the real problem, which is the adrenal function. So the problem is that our body produces the same primitive response to a traffic jam as early man's did to being in front of stampeding antelope. That's what our adrenals were meant for. You know, that level of, you know, a couple times in our life we had to run from stampeding antelope. But today we have cell phones, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have email, we have toxic food, toxic water, toxic air, we have families, jobs, relationships, finances. We have all these things that are just draining our adrenal glands. So when I'm working with someone with hormonal balance, I never ever forget adrenal function, because adrenals produce sex hormones. And with adrenal exhaustion, they're too tired, truthfully. Sex hormone production is a luxury the body can do without when it has all these other stresses to deal with. So they don't produce it. And that, yes? Oh, men definitely. I'm speaking from women because that's mainly who I work with. I don't have as much experience with men. But when I do, I always address their adrenal function. I always test for adrenal function, yeah. And the test that I do, I told you that I look at the cortisol to DHEA ratio here. And I do that through a saliva test. And in that same saliva test, I also get levels of estriol, estradiol, progesterone, testosterone, melatonin, and then I can see how the adrenal fatigue is affecting the sex hormones, and they always correlate. Low adrenal function, low sex hormone production. A lot of times, testosterone is low, progesterone is low, and that balance for us women especially between estrogen and progesterone is so very important. So if you have really low progesterone, the balance should be like a ratio of 1 to 28, estrogen being 1, progesterone being 28. And if your progesterone level falls, you've got a problem with the balance between them all. It's a very intricate balance and an important one to look at. But what I ask myself when I get these results, I don't stop there. What I ask myself is, why? Why are this person's adrenals so fatigued? What's going on in their life? It's usually not just their job or not just their finances. There's something else. And so I go looking. And the first place that I look is their nutrition. And that's our next topic. You know, by the first or second appointment that I have with somebody, I have them keep a food journal to bring into me. And it's a 4 to 7 day food journal depending on how much time we have between our appointment. But it's one of my intakes that I find really important to do before I do anything else. And it not only tells me what they eat, it tells me when they eat, how often they're eating, what they're eating. I'll find out all kinds of information. They'll say, well, Shannon, I eat all the time because I'm always hungry. Well, that tells me they've got a blood sugar problem. They can't manage their blood sugar. Well, Shannon, I don't eat at work because I get bloated and gassy and I don't want to be, you know, at work. That tells me they have an assimilation problem. They're not digesting and assimilating their food. So it becomes a conversation piece. It becomes, it gives me a lot of insight into their life. What are their cravings? What are they eating most of? So I get a lot of information from this little, you know, food journal that people keep for me. I had a client, have a client who started maybe a year ago or so, and she called me up on the phone and she said, you know, I'd like to come and see you. My main problem is I have this whole body bloat. And she had some other what we would consider hormone type of symptoms. But that was her main complaint. And so I said, well, you know, Liz, just between now and our next appointment, keep me a food journal so I can look at that when you come in and then we can go from there. And so she did, and she came in and I looked at her food journal. And she's a realtor, she has a couple of children, and it was like cereal and milk for breakfast. Then to work she'd take cheese and crackers and some vegetable sticks, and then she would have like a pasta dish and some kind of protein at night. And I said, Liz, I said, your diet is primarily gluten and dairy. And I gave her some tests to take home, because that's how I do all my testing. It's very non-invasive. People, you know, take them home and do them. I said, well, while we're waiting for your results on your tests, I want you to do just a couple things for me. I want you to eliminate gluten and dairy, and you know, when you come back, I want to see what we find. Well, she came back and her jeans fit. She could wear her rings again. Her bloat had gone down significantly. Now, not all people are as easy as that, but her body had an inflammatory response to these foods, and a lot of people's do. Gluten and dairy are an issue. You know, people have reactions to them that they may not even be aware of. So that's the benefit that I find in, you know, keeping a food journal. While we're on the subject of nutrition, I want to talk a little bit about low-fat diets, which are, you know, not such a problem anymore since the advent of the Atkins diet. You know, people hear I should eat fat and protein, you know. And So it's less and less of a problem, but when we're talking about hormonal balance, it's really important, if you're having hormone problems, to be getting the right fats. Dr. Linda's not allowed to answer this, but does anyone know what hormones are made from? Yes, cholesterol. Cholesterol. And what is cholesterol? Cholesterol is a fat. And so people who go on these crazy low-fat diets, they have nothing to make hormones from. You know, you really need to pay attention to those good fats and have them incorporated in every single meal that you're eating. And just, you know, I've listed, I'm not going to talk about all the fats right now just because of time, but one that I do want to mention is coconut oil. Coconut oil is, they call it the low-fat fat because it can actually boost your metabolism. It has, it can improve thyroid function. It's antiviral, antibacterial. It's a wonderful, wonderful fat, and I recommend coconut oil all the time. So that's an oil that can be really of great benefit. But while we're talking about fat, that brings us to blood sugar regulation. To balance your hormones, you can go such a long way in just regulating your blood sugar, period. Because your body having to regulate your blood sugar for you is such a stress on the body. To have to, okay, bring it up, bring it down, da, da, da. That's such a stress on your body. And if your body doesn't have to do that all the time, it can have energy to do hormones. So when I have people come in who are having blood sugar problems, I start them out with a very low carbohydrate diet, and then we'll tweak it from there. But to address blood sugar problems, you really need to get to a place where you're eating really good protein, really good fat, and some vegetables. And then add in a little bit of carbohydrate and see how your body does with that. And people with blood sugar imbalances, after they get over the initial depression or shock of having to eliminate some carbohydrates, they feel so much better. And then, so just to have that balance in your life can take you a long way in regulating your hormones. Still under the subject of nutrition, food sensitivities. I work with them all the time. Food sensitivities are another stressor on the body that can complicate your hormonal issue or other issues. I do what's called an MRT test, which is a mediated release test. It's a blood test, and it exposes a client's blood to 150 different foods and chemicals that they may be reacting to. And then I get something like 20 to 25 foods that people should take out of their diet, and amazing things happen. Because a food sensitivity test, people tell me all the time, well, Shannon, I don't think I need to take that test because I don't get abdominal cramps after I eat. I don't get rashes after I eat. Well, that's a food allergy. If you have a food allergy, you know the foods you should stay away from. A food sensitivity is a subclinical reaction. You may not even be aware that it's going on, or you may eat a food on a Monday and get a migraine on a Thursday and not make the connection between the food and the reaction. So I run it on everybody. I think it's a really important test to run. I also advise people, once we run this food sensitivity test and we take out all these foods, don't start eating another food like all the time, because that will create another food sensitivity. You get food sensitivities to those foods that you eat every day. You get in a comfort zone. That's why so many people have sensitivity to gluten, dairy, and all of those, because they're in our life so much, and our bodies develop an immune response to them. So go to gluten. You all have seen it in your grocery stores and around, gluten-free diets. Everybody's on a gluten-free diet. They have all these products now that you can substitute to have a gluten-free diet. And gluten is the number one food reaction causing hormonal imbalance, the number one. And those of us from Northern and Eastern European heritage have a greater chance of being gluten sensitive to gluten. I don't know, it's just the makeup of how we are, where we came from. But those of us from that area originally, because I'm not from that area, but I have, ancestry. We have to be really careful about gluten, because if you're eating it and you're sensitive to it, it's wreaking havoc with your body, and you may not realize that is the culprit. And it brings me to dairy. I have a little clinical pearl for you. Whenever I take someone off gluten, I always take them off dairy, because what gluten does when it gets into your gut is your gut is lined by a mucosal barrier. Dr. Linda talked about it a little bit yesterday. And it has a brush border on it. And there are these villi all along it. And they're supposed to be, pretty tight junctures between these villi. But on the top of each of these villi is a little enzyme that's used to digest dairy. And if you have a gluten sensitivity, it has blunted that brush border, and it has eaten away at that enzyme. So you no longer have the capacity to digest dairy. So if you have a sensitivity to gluten, you have a sensitivity to dairy, and they are a team. They get taken out together. So that's another food that if I have a client dealing with hormone problems, it's another food that I take people off. Soy. I'm not a big proponent of soy. I think it's been the subject of a brilliant marketing scheme. I don't think it has, they promote it as having all this healthy stuff for menopausal women, and from the people that I've studied with and what I've read, I don't see it. They do eat soy in China and Japan, but they number one, they eat it in very small amounts. But number two, they prepare it in a way that is easy for the body to digest. They ferment it. But in our culture, no. They put soy cheese, soy ice cream, because people are told they can't have dairy, so they turned to all these soy products. Soy burgers, soy bars, and all these protein bars, there's soy. And soy is really a toxic legume. It's toxic. And we ingest it unfermented, and it wreaks havoc with our bodies, and it disrupts the endocrine system. It has been shown to cause infertility, constipation, fatigue, thyroid problems. All of it prevents ovulation. I'm sorry? Yeah, and it can, yes, and for estrogen-dependent cancers, it's a really bad thing to be eating. But it's also high in phytate, or phytic acid. And all of our grains and legumes have phytic acid in them. And I hope we're all soaking our grains and legumes before we eat them, because that's what gets rid of or reduces the phytic acid in grains or beans. If you soak them overnight, they're much easier to digest, and it gets rid of the phytic acid. And the bad thing about phytic acid is that it reduces the bioavailability of minerals, calcium, magnesium, zinc. Our minerals are hard enough to get without phytic acid in there, you know, messing up the works. So I always take people off soy too. Those are really the three main foods that I look at, even if it doesn't come up on someone's food sensitivity list. I don't see a reason to keep them in the diet. You can have any vegetable that you want, any protein that you want. In the morning, I'll eat like eggs and some sort of leafy green. And I always put coconut oil on my greens. I'll sprinkle them with sesame seeds or something. I always carry nuts with me everywhere I go. I carry them everywhere because they're good. Nuts have protein and fat in them. You know, as long as you're not sensitive to them, they're a great snack to bring. For lunch, some sort of, you know, protein like chicken. I'm a big fan of grass-fed organic beef. It has a lot of the good fats in it, and it's a great source of protein. Fish, I used to recommend a lot, but you know, nowadays fish is even getting to the point where, you know, we can't really tell what's in it, and so not so much. Because of the toxicity, yeah.
What about beef, having all the stress hormones and the animals, pain and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a vegetarian. I do look for organic sources of meat. I always look for grass-fed meat. Yeah, so I don't have that sort of vegetarian thought of meat not being good for you. You know, so I guess if you're a vegetarian, you know, there is a little bit of struggle there.
So what's left for vegetarians?
Well, beans, you know, beans are a great source if you know, soak them overnight. A great book, oh, vegetarians, you'll love this. A great book, if you don't already have it, is Nourishing Traditions. It has a lot of great recipes in there. I love her philosophy, Sally Fallon, I believe. I love her philosophy about food. So beans and nuts, and you know, if raw dairy is also something to be considered. A lot of the problem with dairy and people who have trouble digesting it is because of the pasteurization. It's not the dairy itself. Because when you pasteurize dairy, you heat it, and it kills most of the vitamins and minerals. It kills the enzymes within the dairy. And so if you can find good, raw, organic dairy, that's a great source. So now we're on to digestion, immunity, and detoxification. The digestive system's probably my favorite system of all. You know, Andrea and I went to school together, and I was always of the school of the spleen and stomach. I thought that the spleen and stomach was where it was at, and I still believe that. You know, I love the digestive system. It's so important for us. And I can't talk about the digestive system without talking about the mucosal barrier. And the mucosal barrier starts in your mouth, and it runs all the way to your anus. And if we took it out of a grown person and spread it out, it's as big as a tennis court. And it is so important for our function. It's our largest immune organ. 75% of our immunity is there. And it protects us from infections and infestations, just like our outer skin protects us from infections. And if we get a cut and it's getting infected, we do something about that. Our mucosal barrier is our internal skin. But if it gets damaged, we don't necessarily know that. but it's really important to have an intact, functioning mucosal barrier, because this is what allows you to assimilate your food, to digest your food. It keeps the balance of microfloras healthy. It doesn't let parasites live and infest. It's really, really important. Its job is to allow uptake of nutrients without allowing food into general circulation. And when it does that, that's what leaky gut is. When your mucosal barrier, when your villi start getting holes in them to let food through into your circulation, that's what leaky gut is. And leaky gut causes body aches and pains, fatigue, migraines, all kinds of nasty things. So it's supposed to exclude microorganisms and toxins and food allergens. And it's really important to keep it healthy. What breaks it down? NSAIDs break it down, alcohol breaks it down, food sensitivities break it down, parasites, bacteria, they all break it down. And what I do to test the function of the mucosal barrier is I measure, it produces what's called secretory IgA. And secretory IgA is an antibody, which is basically a protein. And that protein is produced against an antigen. An antigen is something that the body is looking at as foreign. If you have a food sensitivity, your body looks at that as foreign. If you have a parasite, your body is looking at that as foreign. So when I look at secretory IgA, if someone has a really high secretory IgA, I know that their body is fighting an acute infection because their body is producing all this secretory IgA against something. And so then I have seen people who aren't producing very much secretory IgA at all. And that tells me that they have a chronic infection that's been going on for years. And the same thing happens with secretory IgA as what happened with cortisol we were talking about earlier. Your body gets to a point where it cannot produce it anymore. You have a raging infection, it goes on for years, and your body just can't produce the secretory IgA anymore. So both a high secretory IgA and a low secretory IgA both tell me that there's either an acute infection or a chronic infection going on. You want sort of a middle of the road secretory IgA because you want some in your gut. You want your gut to be protecting you and that kind of thing. But, you know, again, I run a simple saliva test to test that, and that will tell me, you know, going back to hormones again, if this is a stressor that the body is dealing with, and then I have to find out what that is. You know, so measuring the secretory IgA for me tells me a lot about a possible other stressor that the body is dealing with that's creating a hormone imbalance or whatever it is. So from there, I really go with my philosophy of the 3 R's: to remove, replace, and restore. After looking at the secretory IgA, I then, you know, wonder, you know, what it is. And hopefully I would have gotten rid of, you know, any food sensitivities prior to that. And so I do stool sampling as well. And that's what I send to my friend in Nigeria, Dr. Ibrahim. He's a master at looking at parasites. Because a lot of the labs in the United States, people think parasites aren't a problem here because we're an industrialized country, we're supposedly clean. But parasites are a big problem. They're a huge problem, and they drain people's energy every day. And they throw off your hormonal balance, and they cause all these other obscure symptoms when could be one of the problems, not all the time. But I've never run a parasite test and not found a parasite. So it's, you know, it's a bigger problem than you might think think it is. I was watching Dr. Oz the other day, and I was like, oh, he's going to talk about parasites. And then he brings on this person that like they're getting eaten alive or something, and I'm like, oh, it's really misleading, because most of the parasites don't eat you alive, or they don't, they're hidden in there, taking up your energy, finding a cozy place to live, and really wrecking your gut health. I would definitely recommend, I know I'll tell you about myself. One of the reasons I started my business is because I had skin condition. I had a bad skin condition, and it just came out of nowhere. And nobody could help me. No dermatologist, no MD, no esthetician, nobody could help me. So I wanted to find out on my own what happened to my skin all of a sudden. I was under a really stressful situation at the time, but it's taken me 12 years to figure this out, but I had parasites. And because of parasites, partly because of adrenal fatigue, I also had a lot of food sensitivities. And so it's not like an uncommon thing. You do have to get a stool test. It's not like a real pleasant thing to do. People don't like to do it. I don't like to do it. But stool testing is, I think, the way to go when you're testing for parasites. You do have to find, someone like Dr. Ibrahim, who is, amazing at finding parasites. His test costs about $250 or so. His herbs, that he sends back herbs to me to get rid of the parasites, because I'm not a parasitologist. I trust his judgment better than my own to have the client do, which can be pricier than the test, actually. But I think it's something to think about. If you have obscure problems and this is what I do in my practice, if someone has cleaned up their diet, if they're taking the supplements that I recommend and they're not getting better, and I've looked at their gut and their secretory IgA is high or really low, I think parasite. I immediately think parasite. And so I test for parasites a lot. And so it's just another one of those areas that you can look. And another reason for parasites is just what Dr. Linda was talking about yesterday. Many of us are low in hydrochloric acid. That's our first defense against parasites. If you have adrenal malfunction, your hydrochloric acid production is going to be low. If you have a lack of zinc and thiamine, it's going to be low. If you have type A blood, your HCl is going to be low. So I always, when I'm working with people, I always put them on a combination of hydrochloric acid and enzymes, because I don't want them to get reinfected with parasites, and it's a good way to guard yourself against parasites, because many of us are low in hydrochloric acid. I use L-glutamine a lot. I use Jerusalem artichoke, butyric acid. Vitamin D, believe it or not, helps keep the gap junctions in the intestines tight. Probiotics, but most of all, cultured vegetables. Do you know about these? Do you know about cultured vegetables? It's
traditional Russian.
Is it?
Yeah,
oh, well, right. Yeah, of course. Well, I have just recently been, well, not recently, maybe within the last 6 months, been, and I gave you all a recipe in the folder there of cultured vegetables. I've been giving them to my daughter, just a tablespoon with her, she hates it, but just a tablespoon with her meals to really repopulate her gut. I mean, you can go out and buy probiotics, but cultured vegetables are really wonderful in repopulating the probiotic culture in your gut. And I have to give credit, that's from Body Ecology website. It's another website. I didn't put that one down, but bodyecology.com. You can also get many recipes on Body Ecology. She has more of a vegetarian bent, so there's a lot of recipes on there that are really good for blood sugar, just all the things that I spoke about. There are also some recipes involving meat too for you meat eaters out there. But just in conclusion, you know, a hormone imbalance isn't necessary. It's not just a hormone deficiency. You can't just, I mean, you could. People do it all the time, but you can't just add a hormone in there and think that you're addressing the problem. You're really not. You are probably, you know, your symptoms may improve, but you especially don't want to take, you know, toxic hormones. If you're going to take hormones, they should be bioidentical. They should be sublingual. A lot of these progesterone creams that people are using, that cream just sits in your skin. Your body cannot metabolize it. So people who are on creams, I test their hormones and their progesterone is like 1,000, 2,000. It's crazy because your body just can't metabolize the progesterone, so it gets stuck in the fatty tissue and it just sits there. So hormone imbalance is just a symptom of a whole body imbalance. And so we'll go back to holistic again. To treat a hormonal imbalance, you need to take a good look at your life. You need to take a look at your lifestyle. You need to take a look at what you're eating, your digestive function, your adrenal function. It's so important. And people tell me all the time how hard it is. Well, I know how hard it is. I do it. I do these things. And I do these things because I ask my clients to do these things. And it is hard. And I can't always find something to eat where I go, you know. But for I don't have a resilient constitution. I'm not blessed with hardy genetics. So those of us that are really sensitive, is if I want to have a happy life and I want my clients to have a happy life, and I don't want to give them just a hormone to mask something that their body is trying to tell them. Their body is trying to tell them that they are out of balance. And stress is, whether it's internal or external, stress is now running their life, and they need to take a vacation. They need to, you know, take these steps toward better health. And I'm really clear with my clients, if they don't want to do that, I'm not the practitioner for them. I'm not, because I really don't have any interest in treating a symptom without knowing why it's happening.